Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our sustainability chat here for the month of November. I'm Casey Meehan. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at Western Technical College, and in that capacity, I also help support the Sustainability Institute put on programming just like this. The Sustainability Institute it's a 501c3 located in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and we've got a mission of celebrating sustainability efforts in our area. We really want to help paint a positive vision of what sustainability could be and what a sustainable future looks like in the Driftless region. So please, for the remainder of the chat today, please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted. It just helps with the presentation. We will be monitoring the chat box. So if you've got a question or a concern, please do type it in there, and you can find that you can find the chat box on your toolbar, the Zoom toolbar. It's the little bubble, conversation bubble. So click on that and you'll be able to get in touch with us. And just so everyone is aware, this chat will be recorded and available on our website in the next day or two. So we are really happy that you're joining us today for the super timely sustainability chat, right? As winter feels like it's about to set in here, and snow for sure is going to be flying before too long. So today we're going to be talking about winter salting. But first, we want you to take just a quick poll so that we and our guest presenters can better understand where your perspective is on salting. So you should see a poll in front of you. If you could just take a few seconds to answer those questions. Great, and it looks like most people have answered those questions. So nobody that has answered has heard of Wisconsin Saltwise before. So this is great. Welcome. We're glad you're here and you can learn more about it. And a few people, about half the people, know how our municipality or your municipality de-ices the road. So again, stuff that we'll get into today. Now, the Sustainability Institute approaches sustainability from a holistic perspective. We know that it is impossible to separate the environmental and the economic and the social issues that we're faced with today. Those things are all just intertwined. And so our work is guided by the UN Global Goals, which is a plan to address some of those world, big challenges by the year 2030. One of those goals is focuses specifically on making sure that everyone has access to clean water. And as you know, here in the upper Midwest and in Wisconsin, in the Driftless area, we are so lucky to be surrounded by the freshwater resources that we have. I mean, we are literally and metaphorically swimming in it, right? But history tells us that humans can foul what seems to be infinite bounty. It happens again and again. So while we have this access to amazing freshwater resources, we need to really be mindful that about our actions, right? So that we don't ruin this gift that we have. And one way that we can all help with making sure that we've got clean water is by preventing the pollution that we do make from getting into the watershed in the first place. And that brings us to sidewalk and road salt, which is, as all of you know, it's a staple of winters here in the upper Midwest. So New Hampshire, it turns out, I learned this from a little bit of research. New Hampshire was the first state to use salt on the roads back in 1938. And it worked so well that winter that the practice of spreading salt actually spread throughout the snowy parts of the country in the ensuing years. And today, it turns out that we scatter an estimated 20 million tons of salt on US roads annually. Now that's about 123 pounds of salt for every American. And the accumulation of road salt in surface and groundwater, it's a regional problem. I mean, this is getting to be a pretty big deal. The chlorides in salt damage freshwater ecosystems. They harm plants, they harm wildlife, and it turns out that they also pose a real threat to human health. So what we put on our sidewalks and roads finds its way to the La Crosse River Marsh, the Black River, the Mississippi River, all the little tributaries and our groundwater as well. And it's not just harmful to us and to the environment, but salt causes an estimated $5 billion, with a B, $5 billion in corrosion damage to cars, our roads, and our bridges in the US every year. So today we have with us two guests, Allison Madison, who is the Wisconsin Saltwise Sustainability and Development Coordinator, and Louis Kuhlman, who's the environmental planner for the city of La Crosse. And they are here to help us understand really what we can do to break or at least reduce our road salt addiction. So without further ado, Allison, why don't I turn it over to you? Welcome to Sustainability Chats.
Thank you, Casey. All right, so hello everybody, I'm Allison Madison from Wisconsin Saltwise, and now you've heard of Saltwise, I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing and why you maybe haven't heard this coalition until now. But thanks for joining in today. I'm going to share a few slides with you. So the first slide I have here is just a giant mountain of salt, right? As Casey shared, we've been putting salt down on our roadways for decades now, and these salt mountains have become a pretty blasé appearance in our day-to-day life in the winter, and sometimes they hang around in the summer, hopefully at least covered. But I think we have lost the connection that all of the salt, literally all of the salt that we bring into Wisconsin is going into our fresh water. So sometimes we put it down on roadways first, or in our water softeners, or on fields in the form of potassium chloride fertilizers, but literally all of those salts are going into our water. So we're salting our water at a pretty fast rate. So this image is one that I want everyone to have. If you take nothing away from the rest of the talk, at least to recognize whenever you see salt out, to connect that's all going to our water. And that's why Saltwise got started in the Madison area a little over 10 years ago. Folks had been measuring the chloride concentrations from Madison-Dane County Public Health in the Yahara Lakes, the lakes right around Madison. And those chloride concentrations, salt concentrations, just rising fairly steadily over time. Lake Winger is the smallest lake, pretty highly urbanized watershed, so it has the least ability to dilute that salt that's coming in. But the salt concentrations weren't just going up in the surface water, they're also going up in our groundwater, which is our drinking water for most Wisconsinites. So you can see the average concentration of chloride in the Madison municipal drinking wells just climbing up on that top whisker here at 140 milligrams per liter back in 2018 is well 14. Right on University Avenue in Madison. And that well, the Madison Water Utility is estimating they're probably going to have to shut down in the next 10 to 15 years to the tune of about $7 or $8 million to drill a new well. So this is costly, not just to our health, but also to our pocketbooks as taxpayers. But the problem is not just in Madison. It is a problem across the state, and also, as Casey mentioned, across the Snowbelt region, really, right? Where we've just been dumping salt down, thinking, it's cheap, it does its job. If some is good, more is better. Don't worry about it, right? We haven't thought about the consequences of that action until fairly recently. So in Wisconsin, naturally, we have fresh water, right? Not salt water. So all of these dots looking at chloride concentrations in lakes and streams would be purple. But in the last several decades, that's changed. And we see chloride concentrations creeping up into the tens, even the hundreds. And especially around Milwaukee, the most highly urbanized part of our state, chloride concentrations in the thousands of milligrams per liter. Again, we also see the problem of groundwater salt infiltration across the state, where we would expect it to be naturally, zero, dark blue. That's not the case anymore. And this data is actually from UW Stevens Point Well Water Viewer, which gathers private well data. So this is not municipal data. This is actually from our more rural parts of the state. We've salted our groundwater. Impacts to aquatic life. There's a little bit of discrepancy you can see here about when those begin. Michigan actually just lowered their rate down to 100 and something milligrams per liter. The EPA sets the limit at 230 milligrams per liter. Wisconsin DNR has said that our species here are not quite that sensitive, so they have a slightly higher limit, saying that when salt concentrations, chloride specifically, gets above 395, that's when organisms are going to start to have negative impacts. But they've also put in a secondary limit, which is an acute toxicity limit, saying if organisms are exposed to that concentration for even a very short period of time, there will be negative consequences. And if you're not a chemist, you don't deal with milligrams per liter that often, that lower limit of 395 is the equivalent of 1 teaspoon of salt in 5 gallons of water. So we like to tell people, for every teaspoon of salt you save, you're protecting 5 gallons of water. And in the southeastern parts of the state, we're seeing concentrations in the thousands, as I mentioned. This is from a recent sewer pack study, Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, USGS studies, some numbers right around Milwaukee, over 7,000, so 10 times above that acute limit. And here's just a couple photos showing the decreased rates of growth. We're also seeing decreased rates of reproduction, higher susceptibility to parasites. All this research is coming out of the University of Toledo. Bill Hintz is one of the leading researchers looking at that. He also put together this graphic showing that zooplankton populations are some of the first to be impacted, some of the most sensitive species. So as our waters are getting salty, zooplankton populations start declining. It means we're going to start seeing more algae, more green, murkier waters. Also, that means less food as you make your way up the food chain. Another concern as our waters get salty is that salt water is more dense than fresh water. And so we start to build up this really dense salty layer at the bottom, and that inhibits natural lake turnover. And that is important to recycle or cycle, I should say, oxygen and nutrients throughout the water column. In Wisconsin, we haven't gotten to this point yet, in our lakes, but in Minnesota, next door, also, this is an article from a New York lake that is no longer doing that mixing because it's gotten too salty. So as I mentioned, Saltwise got started in the Dane County area, a coalition of organizations. In 2020, we started expanding out and connecting with other watershed organizations across the state that had been already aware of this issue and taking steps locally. So from Milwaukee up to Superior, Eau Claire area, Fox Wolf in the Green Bay area. All of these groups had been leading classes and trying to get the word out. So the Fund for Lake Michigan has supported our work to allow us to go more statewide. And that's why I'm able to chat with all of you today. So we do have another kind of arrow in our quiver here that's really helping out is that the price of salt is going up. So as salt isn't quite as cheap anymore, people are a little bit more determined to use it more efficiently, the DOT being one of them. So you can see here the cost of salt, and this is actually a price per ton. So you can see it's still relatively cheap, but it has almost tripled in the last 20 years. And that has really driven the state to look at ways to salt more efficiently. And last year actually was a 30-year low for salt use statewide, which is pretty exciting. So Saltwise is working to take those best management practices that we see the state really utilizing, and make sure that all communities across the state and private contractors, businesses are aware that one, we should rethink how we do our salting, and there are some better practices. How can you use them? So calibration is really key, knowing how much salt you're putting down. And then, as I mentioned, education. We can also move towards smarter salt trucks. So this is a photo here from inside a truck in the city of Middleton. This salt truck allows salt to be pre-wet before it goes down. So that helps salt stay on the pavement and not bounce off where we don't need it to be. And you can also see here, maybe, it depends on how small it is, this is 300 pounds per lane mile. And so what the truck does is, as the truck's slowing down, the salt auger slows down. And so a driver is able to maintain that rate regardless of how fast or slow they're driving. If they stop, guess what? The salt stops. I think we've all come up to intersections before where the salt spinners just kind of kept rolling when the driver was stopped and there's a big pile of salt there. So this prevents that. So some of these smarter technologies, again, education is a part of this, has enabled the city of Middleton to reduce salt use by 50%. So these are not insignificant reductions. Other, like I mentioned, private companies that have been able to make these changes are also seeing these same savings. And also want to introduce the term here, anti-icing, which is the use of liquid salt, so salt brine before the storm. And it pre-treats the roads, kind of like putting oil on your skillet before you cook, so that you don't form that same bond between the snow and the pavement, and the plow comes and the snow comes off much more easily with far less salt. So Saltwise is working to, like I said, get the word out about these practices through workshops. We've hosted equipment open houses across the state, including in Onalaska just last month. And also we provide webinars for any winter maintenance professionals or others interested in learning more about the subject. Next one's coming up on December 8th. Last January, we hosted the first ever Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week with several partners from across the state. So that's really geared towards the general public. And just another great platform to celebrate the successes. Here I've got a little picture from Ho Chunk Gaming outside of Madison, reduced salt use by 70% through adopting these practices. So I'm out there, I'm trying to, share the word with folks so people understand that salt is a pollutant and a permanent pollutant at that. And here's just a little photo of someone with their dog. We were printing some little Saltwise bandanas and t-shirts at this event. So what can you do? I would encourage you to, participate in Salt Awareness Week this year. Join one of the webinars, share them with friends, family, promote the training opportunities that we have, whether that be to get make sure your municipality is getting involved, private companies, if you live in an apartment building, those facilities staff could attend a training. You could also get involved with chloride monitoring at the local level. The Isaac Walton League provides free training materials and chloride test strips. And then, of course, just continue to spread the word and slow down on spreading the salt by sharing it with others. And our social media is a great way to do that. If you want to follow us and like our posts and just kind of help to spread awareness. So that's what I've got to share a little bit about our statewide work.
Great, thanks, Allison. And please stick with us. I'm sure we'll have some questions from the audience. And again, a reminder to anyone out there watching this, if you've got any questions at all, please do type them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get to those during the Q&A part of the session, which we'll have in just a little bit. So we're going to transition from Allison over to Louis Kuhlman, who is the environmental planner for the city of La Crosse, to tell us a little bit about what's happening with salt use in the city. So Louis, take it away.
Great, thanks, Casey. And I was a little bit sad to see that nobody had heard of Saltwise before. I actually had before I met Allison, so I was really glad to hear her reach out. But I remember a few years ago in winter walking around. I live and work downtown, so the sidewalk salting is just really intense. and it's not good for your shoes too. So if you do a lot of walking downtown and during the winter, it's kind of a nuisance. So I'm really glad for this resource, and there's a lot more information on their website. But enough about me. Let me show you a little bit about what I'm doing, or what the city is doing, I should say. All right. So, all right, I'm going to talk about the salt impacts in La Crosse and how our strategic plan for sustainability addresses them. So, as Casey mentioned, I'm our environmental planner. So one of my main tasks is implementing our strategic plan for sustainability, which was adopted in 2009. And we're actually in the process of updating this plan. So we're really looking forward to seeing how we can incorporate the practices that Allison is talking about in our update. But so our 2009 plan had kind of a rough definition of sustainability to meet the needs of the present while minimizing our negative impacts on future generations, which, minimizing our salt concentrations in our water is definitely up there. So the plan is organized around our natural steps framework. So the natural step is, there are 4: reducing our dependence upon fossil fuels, and reducing our dependence on chemicals, and reducing our dependence on activities that harm the life-sustaining ecosystems, and meeting the hierarchy of present and future human needs fairly and efficiently. So our salt use kind of touches on the second and third. So I'm going to talk about how we're reducing our dependence on chemicals and on other manufactured substances. So our goal is by 2025, the city will replace 50% of purchased products with environmentally preferred products. And among the strategies to do that is developing a policy to minimize the use of salt and sand for winter snow and ice removal. And also I threw in the safe winter driving techniques, which I thought was, a little relevant, but not necessarily directly related to salt. So our streets department is in charge of clearing off the snow. We currently have one truck that has the capability of brining or applying that treatment to prevent icing up. And that truck mostly focuses on our bridges, hills, and curves before storms. I talked to our Superintendent LaFleur about plans for the future, and we're looking to get 2 more trucks to apply brine before storms, and also include brining intersections too. So because reducing the possibility for accidents there. And also I learned that our trucks apply a 95% sand mixture on our local streets. So you're going to see that most of that is sand. And the difference between sand, something I also learned from SaltWise, is that sand doesn't necessarily get rid of the salt. It just helps, get rid of the ice. It just helps provide traction. And below a certain temperature, it's really not efficient to, I believe it's 17 degrees Fahrenheit. It's really not that efficient to apply salt because it won't melt the ice. So below that temperature, you're much more effective just applying sand to get traction. All right, and then under our third step, the reducing our dependence on activities that harm the life-sustaining ecosystems, we have a goal about water. So we strive to preserve and enhance its natural resources, including wildlife habitat, forests, water, wetlands, and blufflands. So one of the things it talks about is establishing water conservation policies and adopting a well field protection ordinance. So we want to make sure that the land use around our wells isn't doing the kind of stuff that's accumulating salt. For example, we have a lot of wells near the UWL campus, and as development increases around there, like if there's a new parking lot or something, and which gets salted, that has the potential to go into our groundwater. And also, we're also thinking about the water we, not just the water we take in, but the water we put out from our stormwater and sewer treatment. So I talked to our well superintendent, our water superintendent, and we have 12 wells in operation. And the average concentration of chloride is about 34.6 milligrams per liter. So we're pretty safe if you compare it to the charts that Allison had up. Our highest concentration in wells are 85 and 65 milligrams. And the reason for that is because of their proximity to the river. So as more water flows that way, it gets more concentrated. And our lowest well is 9.5, and I'm not quite sure where that is, but I'll have to look it up. And in terms of developing a wellhead protection ordinance, we're referring to the DNR's website for source water protection. There's some planning involved, and definitely some conversations we'll have to have with property owners to reduce our risk and hopefully preserve our salt or preserve our water for the future. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Louis. And we do have a few questions here. So one question that comes to mind is, Allison, I'm curious about, you mentioned that there's already so much salt in the water, and once it's there, we can't really, it's there, right? It's sort of there permanently. Is there anything we can do to help remove some of the salt that's already in the environment?
Yeah, so salt is permanent in the water. We do, though, like in our streams, if the lakes have outlets, like that water can flush out, right? And then if we stop salting, today, let's say we're putting 0 salt down, we had 0 inputs, I think we'd see some pretty dramatic increases or improvements to our surface water. We do have a bit more of a lag time when we start looking at groundwater, right? Because now that salty is also, it means that we're recharging some of our lakes and our streams with some salted water, even in the summer months. So we're not, if you're looking at like a stream or river in Wisconsin, and I could share some data on this if folks are interested, had to limit what I could pack into 10 minutes, but we're seeing these spikes kind of after a storm or after like storm melt, and there's runoff. But even in the summer months, things are not going back down to 0 anymore. And that's because of that groundwater recharge. So I think, the best thing we can do is just work on limiting our salting from this point forward, just using it as needed. There's not necessarily a lot to do to rehabilitate. We just can't pull that salt out. It's so tiny, those sodium and chloride ions, even from our wastewater. It's really doesn't make sense from an energetic point of view.
And so what about, what can people at home do? So we've talked a bit about municipalities, but are there recommended products that people could use at home on their own sidewalks that maybe don't have salt? Or and also thinking about, how do we monitor the salt that we're using at home, whether that's suggestions for monitoring home water softeners and their salt use, or just the amount that we're spreading on our property. Do you have what suggestions and tools does Saltwise have?
Yeah, so Saltwise does have some little cups here. I mean, I don't know if anyone needs a plastic cup, but it is a reminder that just a 12-ounce cup of salt is enough for 10 sidewalk squares or a 20-foot section of driveway. So that kind of gives you a perspective that we generally take that cup and, you shake it up pretty fast, right? And we're using more salt than we need. So I would, if people want to go to the Saltwise website, or kind of just remember that general guideline of 12 ounces for a 20-foot driveway. I would also say, maybe getting yourself a tool, like even converting like a Parmesan cheese shaker, into your salter. So to help you to spread that salt out. Otherwise, looking at, making sure you've got a really good shovel, getting out there, sooner rather than later, and removing that snow by mechanical means instead of relying on salt if possible. I actually have a little ice scraper at home, so I can kind of like chop the salt and really get underneath it, especially if you're having a bad day. Sometimes that feels good. But yeah, so I would say just like having a few different tools in your toolbox that you can go to before salt on your driveway and sidewalk. If you have like a drainage problem and you're constantly, having a refreeze like over your steps, like maybe in the summer, look at like, why is that happening? And can you do something to fix that? So salt isn't, the Band-Aid solution. And then I would say in terms of water softeners, that there are actually some salt-free alternatives. So you can go to the Saltwise website to look a little bit more into that and find one that could work for you. But if you do have a salt-based softener right now, and it's fairly new, just making sure that it's running as efficiently as possible, because they aren't always optimized for your local water hardness and the amount of water that your household is using. So those are things that, factory settings, it'd kind of be like buying an air conditioner that's set, like 55 degrees and just putting it in and plugging it in and letting it run when you don't need it to be that cold in your house.
The other question just came in from Dorothy. And Lewis, I think this will probably be directed more towards you. The city gives us, at least here in La Crosse, the city provides a sand and salt mix to homeowners through the fire department. At the fire stations, you can go and scoop your own. And do you know what the salt concentration of that mixture is?
No, I'm not sure, but I can ask.
And I don't know. Dorothy, I'm unaware as well. I use that, and to be honest, I don't know if there's any salt in it. My understanding it was just.
So usually people call it winter sand, and they do put a little bit of salt in, sometimes like 5 to 10%. I think Lewis was sharing that the city, when they sand, it's 95% sand, 5% salt. And that's just to prevent the moisture that's naturally present with that sand to freeze, right? Because you don't want like a frozen bucket of sand. So they generally do mix just a little bit of salt in there. And that is like sand is a pretty good alternative, around your home. It's not going to melt the ice, but it can provide traction. So sometimes people are looking at some alternatives like, bird seed, or I know in like southwestern Wisconsin, actually municipalities put down some crushed limestone. But again, those are just for traction. But definitely things we want to do when we get down to below 15 degrees, which is, I think Lewis mentioned, salt isn't effective anymore. So if you're putting salt down and it's really cold and it's not melting, instead of just putting more and more salt down, switch over to something for traction.
I thought that the city of Milwaukee for a while, were they using like cheese brine or something as a pre-treatment? And I guess just the idea of brine in general, what are the drawbacks of that?
Yeah, so when you bring up cheese brine, and there's actually a county, Price County. There's a county north of La Crosse in northwestern Wisconsin, Polk County maybe, that is using some cheese brine. And one of the concerns about brines that have organic material, so anything with carbon in them, right? Carbon is carbohydrates, right? Delicious food for us, also for microbes. So when you put like cheese brine down, or sometimes you hear about beet juice, again, sugars, carbon, right? It gets into our water. And once it's there, the little microbes are going to eat that. And they are going to also pull oxygen out of the water as they do that. So we have to be concerned about just moving from one product to the next, with, the drawbacks that are present in anything, right? There's no silver bullet, unfortunately, for winter snow removal.
So we've got one final question here, Allison, and that is, my hunch is that most of the people in this meeting right now are sort of self-selected to be pretty conscientious about the salt that they're using, right? And they care about this, but we might live next to people that don't, and they use all sorts of salt. What advice do you have, or what tools maybe does SaltWise have to help spread the word to our neighbors in a way that kind of brings them on board? Are there signs that you have, or discussion groups or anything like that?
Yeah, so we do have like different door hangers or some handouts. If you go onto the website, it's under they're like partner resources outreach tools. We have some handouts that could be useful for like going to speak to your neighbors, as well as speaking to, if there's a business that you patronize and you see that they're doing a lot of extra salting, you could share the information with them. And yeah, we're hoping to, continue this partnership with the City of La Crosse and other watershed organizations around La Crosse to develop some resources that would be La Crosse specific as well.
Is there something that that the people on this in this meeting today can do to help move our municipalities along? I guess
So,
like how could we help you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think actually, if you can all go onto like our Facebook or our Twitter, Instagram, whatever social media you use, and then start like liking this stuff and like spreading the word. I do think that, Lewis could maybe speak a little bit more, but the City of La Crosse is doing the City of Onalaska has done a ton of great work, and municipalities need to hear from their citizens that this matters. Because more often than not, what municipalities are hearing are the people who are complaining that there's not enough salt down. And so that ends up driving this move towards oversalting.
Lewis, I'm going to throw the last word to you. How can the folks on this in this meeting help you out?
Good question. I think, taking some of the resources that Allison's provided and just taking them to heart and reaching out to businesses. I think that's probably the biggest concern I have, is just like, what are private organizations doing, like especially large institutions. I mean, they have the most land area, so they're kind of hopefully the easiest to do outreach with, but like our hospitals and universities and the city and the county's campuses all have a lot of land that they could take better care of. So I think just speaking to your elected official and saying, you're concerned about salt and in the water, and making sure that this is something that gets attention.
Great. And I lied. I've got one last question that came through. And this is to Allison, wondering if you or your coworkers are traveling at all during COVID. There's a drinking water conference that one of our watchers is organizing in March, and was wondering if you'd be able to come to La Crosse for that. We will put that person in touch with you. So be on the lookout, Allison. You'll have an email probably heading your way about a drinking water conference in March.
All right. Thanks, Casey.
You bet.
Thank you everyone so much. It really was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Again, thanks, Lewis and Allison. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's really important work. And I think it's something that more people need to know about. So I'm so grateful that there are people on this call, and I know they're going to go out and spread the word and not the salt, which is a great thing. And I just want to remind everyone that free programming like this isn't possible at all the generous support from the members of the Sustainability Institute. So I want to give a special thank you to our promoter, champion, advocate level members, Wade Hackbarth, Glenn Jenkins, Jacob Siamas, Raj Schnick, Dorothy Leonard, Genwine, and Lee Rosh. And if you like what we're doing and you want to help support this shared, vision that all of us have to bring about a cleaner and safer and healthier and more vibrant driftless area, then please do consider becoming a member of the Sustainability Institute. We've got a variety of membership levels. So find one that fits with what you're comfortable with and become a member today. It's really easy. Just go to sustaininstitute.com. You can see there's a green button on the top of that page. It says become a member. You can also just make a one-time donation if you'd like. And since it's holiday season, perhaps think about giving the gift of a membership to a friend or a family member. Again, it's really easy to become a member. Just head to our sustaininstitute.com website and it's look for the become a member button. And thanks for attending. But before you leave, we do have a quick poll that's going to flash on your screen here. That just gives the Sustainability Institute a little bit of feedback about this type of programming. So if you could take just a few seconds and answer the 4-question poll that is on your screen right now. Great. It looks like had a number of responses there. So thanks again for attending. Sustainability Chats will be back. We're taking December off, but we will be back in the new year in 2022. So we will see you then in 2022 and happy holidays, everyone.